Smells good, Mom.
Make any space the space. Whiffers.
Just can't shake that nose-stalgia? Give us a call at 1-800-SOMEONE'S got your nose.
Won't you get a whiff of that?
Do you suffer from scent aesthesia? This perfume on radio. Tune in, it's just a stereo. This is perfume on the radio on Lookout FM. You're listening to Perfume on the radio on Lookout FM.
Has anything that you ever really, really, really wanted ever eluded you? Like, really wanted? When I was a little kid, I split time between American and French cultures, and in my 13th year for 9th grade, I went to live in Paris for a spell. Now, I speak French fluently. I had lived in Paris before, and I went to a French school here in the US, but this was 9th grade, and I was, at least to my friends in the US, what was known as a dork. I was nice enough, but I was definitely an outcast from the cool club, and in Paris, starting fresh, I was desperate to be accepted. This was an era where my major musical influences were, and let's be generous here, a little bit childish. American 80s pop was supplemented by the soundtrack to The Little Mermaid and Dick Tracy by Madonna. My big claim to fame was that I could rap along to all the songs by Les Inconnus, which, if you're not familiar, is definitely not cool. Sort of equivalent to knowing Ice Ice Baby by heart, but in French and funny. Incidentally, I also knew Ice Ice Baby by heart, and although her music was clearly inferior to what New Kids on the Block were up to, stylistically, I was really digging what Debbie Gibson was doing with a fedora. So for my first day of 9th grade at the Lycée Buffon in Paris's 15th arrondissement, I sidled into my new classroom with a teal blue shoulder-padded Southwestern-style top, yellowy white folded up jeans, white Keds with puff paint, peace signs on them, and yes, the Debbie Gibson fedora. As the whispering subsided in the classroom, it began to dawn on me that I had made a fatal stylistic mistake. Of the 45 kids looking up at me from their desks, 45 of them were dressed in black, gray, or tan cashmere sweaters. There were a few jaunty scarves, but color was definitely not the thing, nor, as it turns out, were Debbie Gibson-style fedoras. So this is what I was seeking: acceptance, friendship, respect. And what I found? None of the above. I was an outlier and an outcast, and I'm sorry to say that it didn't change that year. I got a lot of flack from my fellow students. I took myself too seriously. My clothes were lame. Things like that. No big deal. Who knows? Maybe they were right. But then, one day, the absolute worst, Caroline flounced into the bathroom where I was hiding out with my fellow nerdy friends, looked me over with absolute disdain, told me that my hat was ugly, and promptly pop it into the toilet bowl, pressing the flush mechanism with a look on her face like, I am so glad I was able to help you, you fashion disaster. I was absolutely shocked at how mean she was, and basically avoided her and all her friends, which was about 90% of my class, for the rest of the year. So needless to say, my big quest failed, but that's okay. I've had many other quests since then. For professional success, for love, for a super dope 2-piece power suit for my recent 43rd birthday. Some succeed, some fail, but let's be honest, the core of all of them, every single one, is the same. Acceptance, friendship, respect. It's an eminently human need. It's the most primal, and it's a search that we're all engaging in. I hope you, out there, find it. This episode is devoted to the capture of precious entities and the lengths that humans will go to do so. Let's imagine this as treasure hunting, but if you want, we can also think about it as a search or a desire or a quest. We can think about it in terms of what humans find precious, why, and how preciousness relates to rarity. We're joined today by several amazing guests. First, we have Chris Kemp talking about the quest for ambergris. Then we have Mason Hainey talking about the uses for a rare botanical in fragrance. After Mason, Carlos Morera and Nina Mross join us to talk about the quest for a rare plant. And finally, the show closes with Matthew Teutimez from the Kizh Gabrieleno tribe talking about how his tribe relates to aromatics and searching out botanicals with the nose. Perfume on the Radio is a show that airs on occasion on LA's own Lookout FM. The show is produced by the Institute for Art and Olfaction, which is a nonprofit organization devoted to experimentation and access in the field of perfumery. My name is Saskia Wilson-Brown, and I'll be leading you through the 16th episode, an episode that we're calling I'll Find You, My Precious. So get cozy, and let's get started. Our first guest on today's show is Chris Kemp. Based in Michigan, Chris is a writer and a de facto expert on a beautiful and honestly pretty bizarre material known as ambergris. Anecdotally, I often get emails from people asking me to look at a photo of some gray lump that they found on the beach. Do you think it could be ambergris? They ask me hopefully. I never want to let them down, so I always forward these emails to Chris, who is good-humored and gracious about it, always. So thank you, Chris, and here he is. Well, Chris, first of all, welcome. I'm really happy to have you on the show. And, I've been following your work for, I think, almost a decade now. So it's nice to hear your voice.
Thank you. Yeah, nice to be here.
Yeah. So let's start just asking the obvious question, which is, what is ambergris? And am I pronouncing it correctly?
You are. Yeah. Full marks for correct pronunciation.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, it's a mysterious substance, but essentially it's a material that is produced in the hindgut of sperm whales, and I guess the best way to characterize it is that it's sort of the product of indigestion, if you like, by sperm whales. So sperm whales live almost exclusively on a diet of squid, and they eat, up to a ton of squid a day. And they digest the squid, but one thing that they can't digest is that sort of really hard, durable beak that a squid has. That it looks almost like a parrot's beak.
Mm-hmm.
And in a healthy, normal whale, it will regurgitate all of that non-digested material back up into the ocean. But in a really small percentage, and I think it's estimated at around 1% of sperm whales, that material makes its way into the small intestine, and it sort of chafes and irritates the gut lining, which is pretty delicate. And thanks to that, the sperm whale produces this very fatty, cholesterol-rich substance that sort of binds up the squid beaks into this slurry that produces less discomfort on the lining of the gut. And that ultimately is what becomes ambergris.
Wow. So how does that end up in human hands? And how do people find that?
Yeah, good question. One really interesting thing about sperm whales is that most of their lives are still fairly mysterious to us, in that we don't observe those lives that spent, a mile below the surface of the ocean. And so there are sort of gaps in our knowledge, but what we do understand is that if this sort of compaction in the gut is allowed to sort of grow and enlarge, eventually it blocks the gut completely, and that sort of becomes a fatal condition for the sperm whale. And so most likely ambergris kills the sperm whale, its body breaks apart in the ocean, and that lump of immature ambergris is kind of released into the ocean. And then it begins another journey, because it sort of bobs around and it becomes altered by the seawater and by oxidation with sunlight, and it sort of dries out and matures and becomes this thing that we really, value and covet as a culture, and that's the ambergris. But that requires some lucky person to stumble on, a boulder of it on a remote beach somewhere. And so that's typically how it arrives in our hands, is that somebody has found some, and they know what it is they've found, and it makes its way into this strange marketplace.
Oh my God. Okay, so we'll get back into that in a second. But first of all, so I didn't realize that it was potentially fatal for the whale. There's all this in mythology around ambergris, like, oh, the whale vomits it up or the whale poops it out. But what you just told me is new to me, so that's really interesting.
Yeah, almost certainly it is a pathological condition.
Wow.
And I always say to people, if you've ever held a piece of fresh black ambergris, there's absolutely no doubt which end of the whale it came out of, because it's really, really dungy and stinky. And so, yeah, and there's all these instances in the historical record of people finding a dead sperm whale that has washed ashore on a beach somewhere and cutting into it to find ambergris inside. And so there's this, correlation is not causation, as scientists like to say, but there's definitely a suggestion that in those whales, it was the ambergris that probably killed them and made them sort of wash ashore as a carcass.
And there's a connection to whaling as well. Is that correct?
Totally,
I only know this from Moby Dick, so.
Yeah. No, it was a really important commodity during the whaling era. The whalers used to kill and harvest all different species of whales, and sperm whales were one of the most important species that they did kill. And the whalers definitely knew that once they'd finished sort of removing the blubber and cooking it down, one of the first things they needed to do was check the intestines for ambergris, because it was a very important commodity.
So they wouldn't kill the whale for the ambergris, but it was sort of a byproduct of their activity.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I think that it's too unpredictable of a substance. The cost benefit ratio that would not have been worth them killing a whale just to get the ambergris, because in most instances a whale would not have contained ambergris, but in some instances it did.
So speaking of costs, so historically and I mean, urban myth around ambergris is, it's worth its weight in gold, blah, blah, blah. And historically, certainly it seems to have been of great value. But can you talk a little bit about that? Because the unreliability, makes one think that maybe it isn't of such value to the perfume industry today.
It's a fair point. And it's one that I really think that I struggled to resolve that mystery. Like, I know that it's unpredictable. And that's one of the things that leads to its value, because it's kind of one unlikelihood on top of another. Only so many whales produce it. And then it has to be released into the ocean. Then somebody has to find it, and it has to have, survived its journey, and all these different unlikelihoods stacked on top of one another. And that's what makes it so valuable. But that's what also makes it a really awful substance for a manufacturer to have to rely on. I mean, you don't know when your next lump is going to appear, and if you're going to be able to buy it from the person who found it, and if they're going to be asking for the right price. And you don't even know if what you're buying is really ambergris. Sometimes I look on marketplaces like eBay, and it's totally obvious to me that there's a lump of something that is clearly not ambergris that's being sold for like $1,000.
Wow.
And some poor schmuck somewhere ends up buying it. So that's one of the reasons why I think perfumers have probably moved away from it to a very large extent. But at the same time, it's still traded, and it's still purchased for these astonishing amounts of money. And for the book, I managed to talk to a trader called Bernard Perrin, who lives in the south of France, and he is sort of the middleman for many of those perfumers based in the south of France, some of the really high-profile perfumers. And he articulated to me that he travels all over the place, to the Maldives, to the Philippines, to Japan, to go and buy these enormous pieces of ambergris from the people who have found them. Sometimes it's poor fishermen, sometimes it's sort of a middle person in the industry. And he's one of those kind of guys who is kind of like won't get out of bed for something that isn't $20,000 worth of ambergris. He's not going to go there and buy a little egg-sized piece. He's after the big boulders of stuff. And
wow.
So that in itself sort of suggests to me that the industry still uses it. I got tantalizingly close to some people at some of the really big perfume houses, trying to convince them to talk to me, and they would not go on the record. But so there's definitely, to me, there's gaps in information, there's gaps in my information. But the price that it gets on the market and the sort of the interest in it would suggest to me that it's still being used at some level.
That's really good to know. I mean, because I'm not an expert in ambergris by any stretch of the imagination, which is why we're talking to you. But my knowledge of it is that most people now just use ambergris replacers like Ambrox or Cetilox or these synthetics that.
Yeah, I mean, I have always wondered if a substance that comes from a whale that might be pooped out is just a marketing nightmare. And it's quite possible that, because at the other end of the spectrum, there are plenty of really small and independent perfumers who are using it and really vocal about the fact that we are using all natural substances, including ambergris. And I think that just for some of the perfumers, the large houses that are making perfumes for the global marketplace, that they just don't even know how to talk about this stuff. They're trying to be more vegan, more sort of socially conscious, and something that came from a dead whale is just, it's a real hot potato.
I guess it's the flip side of all natural, right? Is all natural often involves dead animals, so. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. On the flip side, saying, oh yeah, we're using the finest synthetic chemicals does not sell a perfume, I don't think, in the large scale.
Yeah. So. Yeah, not to me. Better living through chemistry it's not always better living.
Yeah, except in the case of antidepressants. So who finds these? So you talked about fishermen sometimes, but there's also this other sort of myth around people who are just walking on the beach and, oh, lo and behold, they come across this chunk and now they're millionaires. Is that real? Do people really just find it on the beach like that?
I don't think so. Yeah, I mean, what is it, 2021? So it's almost 10 years since the book came out. And in that time, I have been contacted hundreds and hundreds of times by people who send me a picture of some substance that they found on the beach, and they think that they have just struck it rich. And I don't think there's ever been a case where I've looked at the photo even that they've sent and I've thought, wow, they've done it. Almost always just this weird, fluorescent, bright yellow, glowing object that in some cases, I've even emailed back and said, do not touch that. Because I have no idea what it is, but I can tell you it's not ambergris and it could be dangerous. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that because it's such an unusual substance and it's difficult to identify, I still think that the people who are really having success in finding it know to some extent what they're looking for, and they're a bit more educated about it. They're not just sort of wandering along the beach thinking, well, maybe that's ambergris or maybe that is. So, but yeah, there's definitely people who make a living, or at least part of their living, finding the stuff.
Incredible. Sure. What a life. So we've talked all about how people look for it and how people find it, but we haven't talked about the smell. You spoke a little bit about the black ambergris being sort of fecal. So are there different types of ambergris then and different smells associated?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, so ambergris comes out of the whale by whatever means, we don't know, but we assume that it's released from a dead animal. And when that happens, it's sort of black and sticky and fresh and very dung-like, very fecal. Smells to me a lot like sheep dung, really. But then over the years, as it sort of floats around in the ocean, becomes a lot sort of waxier. It basically goes on this journey from sticky and black to white and waxy and hard. And, along that journey, there's all those different gradations of like black, gray, sort of silvery, and white to silver. And so it's a spectrum, basically. And the black sticky stuff is not really what perfumers are looking for, and so it doesn't really get a good price on the market. But the silver, very refined, older stuff is the ambergris that really gets top dollar. And it does differ. And like if you smell some of the finest white and silver ambergris, it just smells way less aggressive, if you like. It's much more sweet. Always makes me think of like vanilla and candles and polished wood. It's much less like the farmyard, which the black stuff is. So yeah, it's definitely and that's what makes it such a mysterious substance, and also such a difficult substance to work with, because every piece is kind of different.
Phenomenal. It's the anti-Starbucks.
Yeah, fair enough.
I love it. Well, thank you, Chris, for spending the time and explaining this sort of magical material to us.
You are most welcome. Yeah, I really enjoyed speaking to you.
That was Chris Kemp, writer of Floating Gold, The Lost Species, and most recently, Dark and Magical Places, The Neuroscience of Navigation. You can find out more about him, of course, with a good old internet search, and I recommend that you do because his books are really fantastic. Now, our next guest is a perfumer who works with rare and magical materials. Based in Rhode Island, Mason Hainey started as a designer on a quest to create the perfect bow tie. His interest in the technicalities and nature of the materials served him well when he started to work with scent. And soon thereafter, he launched a natural perfume line under his brand, Mizu. I invited Mason to the show because I was curious for a perfumer's perspective on how rare materials can serve a practice. Here is Mason. Well, cool. So, our episode today is about treasure hunting. And, we've been talking a little bit. And I think, as I said to you, it sort of occurred to me that working with and consuming scent is a bit of a treasure hunt in and of itself. And I know you feel the same way. But there's also something really ephemeral and intangible about perfume. So in a way, it's a treasure hunt. We can't win. We always lose it.
Well, that ephemeral, that fleeting, that like momentary quality of perfume is actually what I find most valuable about it, especially when you're working with naturals and natural perfumes that just don't last as long. It gives you this incredible power to really be anchored in the present. It brings you to the moment, and it makes you stop and like really appreciate the scent you're encountering, because it's fleeting, it's not going to last forever. And so you want to be able to be there with it. It's funny. So my brand Mizu, my motto is scent as meditation. And it kind of all came full circle a few years back. I have a little meditation chair. And it was 5 a.m. I was like spiraling, trying to meditate, trying to like get in the groove of mindfulness, like Mason, be mindful, Mason, focus, Mason, let go. And it just like wasn't working. And my mom had bought me this jasmine plant, and it was blooming on my coffee table. And I got this whiff of jasmine, and it had this incredible power to pull me into the present and really like pull me out of that spiraling, spinning cycle and be anchored and just be present, actually give me something to focus on and appreciate and find all the beautiful little nuances of this little blooming flower that was just like an indole bomb at the time, but I didn't really know that. And that's when I first heard scent as meditation in my mind. And that's kind of where it all led me to my path today. And so what I think I find most valuable about perfume in general is its momentary fleeting quality, because it makes you appreciate the now even more.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I like the fact that it's sort of, you can attain it, but you can't hold it.
Exactly.
It's an impossible, I don't know. We get a lot of people saying, oh, how do I make scent last? And I'm like, dude, it doesn't. There's nothing you can do, like, accept the fact that it goes away.
I know, it's like medicine. You don't want it forever.
So what's a material that you consider a treasure?
Oh man. Okay, so I would say any of those materials that require what I would consider our most precious resource, which is its time. Anything that requires the plants to grow a long period in order to produce the materials that we use for perfume, or anything that requires a long aging process. I have a few, but I think one of my most favorites is orris. And I might be a little biased here because the iris is my favorite flower, but
and orris comes from iris, is that right?
Yes, orris comes from iris, and it comes from a few different varieties. So there's a bunch of varieties of the iris flower, but there's two that are used primarily in fragrance and in flavor too, which I actually just learned. I didn't know that people use orris to flavor things to give a berry-like note, which is so cool to me,
Yeah,
but very expensive.
Oh yeah, seriously.
Yeah, so orris comes actually from the roots of the flower, or the rhizomes, the tubers, and it actually looks a lot like ginger. For anyone who doesn't know or has never seen an iris growing, these little rootlets, these tubers like to grow right close to the soil, and you can see them growing. You can see them there when you're just looking at it from the top. And so what you need to do to extract the orris is to first let the plant grow for a minimum of 3 years. You can use either the Iris pallida or the Iris germanica varieties. For fragrance, Iris pallida is kind of like the gold standard. It has more of the violety, woody, powdery notes. And the Iris germanica, from what I understand, it's a little more berry and a little more dry and used primarily in the flavor industry.
Mm-hmm.
But you need to let these Iris pallida plants grow for a minimum of 3 years. And during that time, we need to do all the standard best practices of agriculture. So weeding and cultivating and aerating the soil, and you can't just let it just sit there, because a lot of these farms, they're subcrops. They're not just the main orris crop. They're like a sub of either olives or other Italian traditional crops out there. Then after you grow for 3 years, minimum of 3 years, you need to then take out the rhizomes, take out the roots, dig them up, and each one needs to be peeled by hand. Because if you think about it, like if you think of ginger, there's no like machinery you can use or to peel it with a machine. It is too individualistic, and there's too many nooks and crannies in there that you need to like get in there with a little peeling knife and skin it essentially. And so once you peel it, you throw it into a jute bag or a burlap bag, and you age it again for a minimum of 3 years. And the longer the better, because the longer you age it, the more the iron content is developed. And that's what gives orris its incredible powdery, woody-like fragrance. And then once it's done aging in these burlap bags, you grind it into a fine powder and you make it, and you distill it, steam distillation. There's a few different ways. You could do CO2, you could do absolute, but you start with steam distillation. And doing so is going to give you something called orris butter. So it's not an oil like a traditional fragrance oil you might get, or like I don't know, it's not like a vetiver oil. It's going to be something that's more the consistency of like a wet earwax. And it kind of looks like earwax. It's a little yellow, it's a little waxy, it's flaky. Then if you want to refine it further, you can wash it in solvent to get an absolute from it, or a CO2 extraction from it. But what you're looking for is a high iron content. And that's going to be critical for a high quality perfume, or high quality orris, I should say.
Yeah, I mean, orris is well, we'll get a little bit into what you enjoy about orris, but Luca Turin described orris butter to me once as a low grade, like a low frequency dirge-like smell with sort of, he said, it's like funereal, and you imagine these sort of gray horses pulling a hearse, and they have plumes on their head. I mean, he has a way with words. So I'm kind of curious. I mean, do you agree that orris is sort of, I guess funereal? Or
I wouldn't say funereal, okay, but I would definitely say low frequency. Like it isn't a floral that's going to knock you over the head. And I wouldn't even classify it really as like full on floral. It is one of those materials that is just so multifaceted. Like it's powdery, it's violety, it's woody, it's berry, it's sweet. It's got a little musk, it's got a little spice. Like it's got all this stuff going on, and all this play, like the room to play with and pull from and take to different places. To me, it smells really refined, really elegant, really that powdery note gives it more of an elegance, and that sweet violety note. It's one of those materials that you smell for the first time and you're like, oh, I don't think I've smelled something like that before. Like you don't have an association in your mind, which is so unique for a scent, because all of us, like our scent language comes from what we smell first. Like for me, I can't smell ylang without thinking of a urinal cake, because that must have like a urinal cake scented, I don't know, when I first encountered it as a kid, I don't know. But like that, those associations are what we think of. So that's a treasure in its own right of having a new experience, I guess you could say.
Oh, totally. And I've never heard that said, that what we associate, how we speak about smell associates with sort of what our first memories of the smell. But that makes so much sense based on that's a really good way of phrasing it.
Thank you. Yeah.
Well, what do you like about working with orris? I mean, is it worth it?
I mean, okay, so orris is pricey. I believe the mythology goes that a good quality orris is pound for pound just as expensive as gold, which just, I mean, from buying it myself, I believe. I definitely think that it's worth it. I mean, despite the price and despite the difficulty to work with, because it is a bit difficult, it's solid. So it's a little more tricky than a traditional oil. You could liquefy it, try to pipette it out, but then you're going to lose some of that exquisitely expensive
Mm,
material on your pipette, and you're going to just throw it away.
totally.
Um, so you can weigh it out as a butter, which requires you to get like a tiny tiny little spoon and start scooping it out. And then it also has this ability to bloom within a fragrance. Like you add a little bit and you're like, oh, that's a good amount of orris. And you come back to it a month later and you're like, oh, wow, that is an orris perfume. So you have to have a base knowledge. But that said, once you get a grip on orris, it has this really beautiful way of bringing floral notes down from the top, down from the heart, bring wood notes up from the bottom, getting that beautiful merry like right in between the heart and base, and extends all of those notes for a longer wear. There's just no floral base note like orris. There's really no note like orris.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't think of any equivalent, really. It's so unique.
Uh,
Although I will say, and maybe you disagree, but I really enjoy how orris and carrot seed vibrate with each other, you know?
they totally do.
They
Yeah.
do,
Okay. So
right? I'm always
yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
there's something equivalent here. It's different, but there's an equivalency in my mind, you know?
They go well. It's the musky quality of it because there is a
Yeah.
certain musk within that orris, and the carrots he totally brings it to the next level. But
Yeah, and there's like a
uh,
fattiness to it too, you know, like
yeah,
it feels
yeah.
round, you know.
You know,
Yeah.
I was attending one of Dawn Spencer Horowitz Instagram lives last year, but we were talking about aura substitutes, and she was like, "Yeah, I use a little bit of cedar, Himalayan cedar, and carrot seed and butter to bring that fatty aspect of it." I'm like, "Oh my god, this is amazing!" So it's like if you're going to make an accord of orris, carrot seed's one of those materials you go to. So
You know,
totally, I can see
and
that.
this the Himalayan cedar makes sense too, actually, because it also has that kind of roundness to it.
Yeah,
But there's
that
nothing
low
like
frequency.
Oris. Yeah, low frequency. Well, Mason, I really want to thank you for your time explaining this. And so I think we concluded that this is a difficult material to work with. It's a difficult material to produce. It's expensive material to buy, but this treasure is worth it.
Totally worth it. Everyone must try.
Sometimes the treasures are worth it. Well, good. Give us hope.
Awesome.
Thank you, Mason.
Thank you, Saskia. It's great to talk to you.
Orris is beautiful, and if you want to try it, do a little search for quote orris butter end quote, and prepare yourself for a tiny heart attack. Depending on the percentage of ions, a tiny quantity, think about the size of your pinky finger or 5 milliliters, will run you around $112, and that's for the relatively cheap stuff. Considering the amount of time it takes for the material to come to maturity, that averages to about $17 per year of production, so maybe it's a deal after all. In any case, big thanks to Mason for taking the time to explain his favorite treasure to us. And speaking of favorite treasures, Carlos Morera and Nina Mross are two amazing members of the ragtag group of incredible people who run the Cactus Store here in LA and also in New York. I've had the pleasure of visiting them at their location in Glassell Park in LA, and all I can say is that if you've ever marveled at Dr. Seuss and his illustrations of invented and weird plants, then my friends, this place is the place for you. It's absolutely mind-blowingly amazing. Carlos and Nina joined me via Zoom from their location, which is about a mile away from me. What can I say? We live in LA and we try to avoid driving as much as we can. Here are Carlos and Nina. Well, cool. So Carlos and Nina, welcome to Perfume on the Radio. And I'm super excited to have you. We're working together on some other stuff, but today I'm going to pick your brain a little bit about plants, particularly plants that are sought after. So the show is about seeking and finding, treasure hunting, I guess you can call it. So I'll start you off by asking, are there any plants that you know of that people go out of their way to try to find?
Yeah, I mean, there's thousands of plants that people go out of their way to find from the beginning of people sort of collecting plants and growing plants. Rarity became a sort of kingpin of making people want to hold on to plants. We've been doing a lot of work on two plants that are particularly sought after. One is a plant called Copiapoa, which is a cactus that's endemic to Chile, to the Atacama Desert, which is the driest desert on Earth. And it grows in this sort of channel where a fog bank exists. Parts of that desert haven't received rain in like 5 million years, but this cactus grows in this very narrow bank, maybe a mile wide or something like that, where the fog exists, and that cactus subsides off of that fog. People have, for a long time been sort of drawn to this cactus because of its sort of enigmatic qualities, and people are sort of smitten with how it's such an amazing survivor. And lately people have sort of taken that to an extreme extent where there's tons and tons of poaching of those plants going on. They're worth like, $20,000 to $30,000 for a small clump of them.
Holy cow, that's so crazy.
Part of that is that they grow so slowly. So you can find really amazing specimens in the wild that would take hundreds of years, if it was even possible, to grow a large specimen like that, or, relatively large specimen like that in a greenhouse. But also the wildness of the plant, the wild growth, creates a certain look and feel of the individual plants that's would be very difficult to replicate in a greenhouse. So
yeah,
in the case of Copiapoa, there's certain reasons also why the wild plants are more desirable to people.
So what are there? I mean, there's aesthetic reasons, which you sort of just described. They grow in a certain way, but what are the other ones?
I mean, I think it's mainly aesthetic. To the untrained observer, they would look like completely different plants. Like you would not be able to tell that one that was grown from seed and cultivation from one that was taken from habitat, you would not be able to tell that they were the same plant. They look that distinct. Like their spines grow 3 times as thick. They grow this waxy sort of sheath around them called glaucum that turns them almost a blue, chalky blue-white color. They cork, they sort of bark at the bottom of their stems. Then they have this completely different appearance. So mainly I think that the attraction is appearance. And then also I think that people sort of want a talisman, a sort of weird memento from these areas that are so remote and so punishing. To have something that's come from that place and to have it on your windowsill gives human beings a weird pleasure.
It's so disturbing in a way, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I really think, and when I say I mean, those human beings who have, safe and relatively easy lives, like many plant collectors are. We have such sort of plush lives. We're very attracted to things which represent that kind of extremity of survival that we, don't experience in our modern capitalistic world. That seeking aspect is part of it too. It's kind of dangerous and it's solving a puzzle. And I think we're driven to that as well through the kind of banality of our regular lives. The plant can kind of represent that for us.
Yeah, there's also sort of a story aspect to it, isn't there, Carlos and Nina? There's this sort of, this I don't know what it looks like, but I gather it's an attractive plant. So, one would come to someone's house and see this thing and, oh, what a nice plant. And then it's like, well, let me tell you, so.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's the plant has been sort of shrouded in all of these stories and mythology, which makes it all the more desirable and collectible, and the other plant, that sort of dovetails into that, which has the same sort of thing, is this plant family called cycads, which are a group of plants that basically look indistinguishable from palm trees. Like people call them palms all the time, but they're not. I mean, for plant people, some are like the most beautiful thing in the world, but to most people, you would see them and you'd be like, oh, that's a nice palm tree. But they are probably the most collected and endangered from collection plant on Earth. They can fetch $125,000 for a single plant.
Oh my God.
fairly small. And, they've done stings, huge poaching stings, and the cartels are involved in trafficking them now. They're ancient plants. They're some of the oldest plants on Earth. They predate the dinosaurs. So they come with this story, of time and history, and the fact that they've outlasted all of these other plants that went extinct, and they've survived every cataclysm on Earth. But to the naked eye, they just look like a freaking palm tree, but when they're wrapped in these stories, all of a sudden they become this plant that people risk their lives or pay $250,000 to own. Some of them, especially living in South Africa, have, they grow in these sort of rocky outcrops close to or on cliffs. And there's one plant in particular, Encephalartos hirsutus, which is probably the plant with the highest bounty on its head on Earth right now. It exists in a crack halfway down a sheer cliff that's thousands of feet. But the population that was on the edge of the cliff, sort of at the top, supposedly was all poached by a I think Vietnamese cell phone mogul. Flew a helicopter up there and basically poached the entire population that was on the sort of precipice of the cliff. And then the only one that was left was halfway down on the sheer cliff, hanging there, and no one can get to it yet. But that plant is,
What did this Vietnamese cell phone mogul do with these plants that he or they poached? What? Where do these plants go?
They planted them around their McMansion.
Oh man.
Yeah, it's really weird.
Wow.
The plant is striking, but if you put that plant in your backyard, someone came over, they wouldn't stop you and ask you what that plant was. They're fairly unimpressive. It's just the fact that they have been imbued with all of this storytelling, and then at the same time, the sort of the human obsession with rarity. The more people poach them, the less there are, the more people want to poach them more.
Right.
This sort of vicious cycle.
I think there's something really interesting too about the way that the context changes your aesthetic or emotional appreciation of a plant. Because, imagining Encephalartos hirsutus on a sheer cliff in its own habitat, in its own community, is just beautiful. And we're sort of not able to just love it from afar. This love turns into possessiveness, which we see in, so many avenues of human existence. But
totally.
I don't mean to say that all of plant collecting or seeking is negative. It's all tangled up in our
humanness.
In our human drive to do things like that.
Yeah, it is always interesting. I always ponder this in relationships, in plants, in perfume, what this desire to own is, and how this desire to own often gets into destruction. You want to own the thing, and in owning it, you kill it. Yeah, that's a different conversation. But I am curious about how this collecting, especially for these rare plants, how does this affect the ecosystem? Are the plants being preserved, or are they being killed?
That's a sort of, big question, and a gray area. I guess sort of a weird both. The plants are taken out of habitat, and therefore, their sort of natural pollinators are not in the context anymore, in the scene. And then human beings are sort of responsible for their sexual activity, which is strange and deranged on its own. But then there is the case of there's tons of climate change happening all around the world. So some collectors make the case that by taking these plants in their backyards or in their greenhouses and giving them ideal conditions and becoming their pollinators, they're in a way preserving them from what might happen to them or what is happening to them in the wild. And, a lot of people justify the poaching of plants in that way.
It seems a little bit of a chicken and egg situation, because we're protecting it from our own behavior, but I don't know. Yeah.
No, it's a full chicken and an egg, you
Yeah.
know, and it's it's something that we've been exploring in our own research and sort of just general thoughts is like, there's the possibility that these plants have conscripted us to help them survive the environment.
Right.
Plants have done that, to tricking certain bugs into becoming their pollinators by mimicking scents, or an orchid mimicking the look of a certain fly that a moth wants to use as dinner, and then inadvertently pollinates it. They use us and our propensity for certain ways of being, and who's to say that in a way they aren't using us for their survival in this era.
I love that sort of who's collecting who.
I would say too, just that, when you take a plant out of its habitat and it becomes an individual or a single unit that was once part of a networked community. I mean, in a way, it becomes part of our community. And I think like that's part of the history of collecting, and in terms of like the Western world or the colonial project of you sort of isolate and assimilate a unit of somewhere else that you then own and kind of control. The ecosystem as a dynamic system is something that is much harder for us to kind of understand or perceive. But on the flip side, by making that single plant perceptible or becoming close to it or having it become part of your community, it's also a link to that ecosystem. Going back to the idea of Copia Poa, like how people want to feel connected to the Atacama Desert. I think that too is kind of two sides of the same coin, where a good collector will learn about and appreciate the ecosystem that this plant comes from, and hopefully learn to care about it.
Yeah. Well, the more you learn about these plants and how to take care of them outside of the environment, the more you appreciate the extreme complexities of their environments, and maybe therefore, want to sort of help protect those environments, or at least like develop a profound respect for them.
Yeah. And especially once you start to, people learned that orchid seeds I'm speaking in broad terms here, but orchid seeds can't germinate without the mycelial or the mycelium that they would be with in nature. So, the more you pull and the more you look and trying to support or propagate or live with this, like yourself will get linked to that ecosystem.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, we were talking about yesterday, like the direct impact, there's lots of direct impacts with removing these plants from their environments. One interesting sort of fact that's happening now is that because people who are looking for these plants and removing them from their environments are looking for very specific physical attributes, say, this Copia Poa cactus that has singular spines coming out of its areoles instead of 3 spines coming out of its areoles, because that's what the market demands. They're removing that physical attribute out of the population in situ, and the leftovers, the Copia Poa that have 3 spines are the ones that are left to reproduce. So physicality of the plants left in habitat, the undesirable ones in quotes, are then left to reproduce and proliferate that physical quality that wasn't desirable. The plants are starting to look different in these habitats because you're removing a certain physical attribute that's desirable to humans.
Wow, that's crazy.
Imagine in 3,000 years, all of the, whatever, the human civilization has completely been, wiped off the planet, or there's very small pockets, but there's greenhouses in Texas where Copia Poa collectors lived, and those plants all had single spines. They were abandoned, but they somehow were able to, to sort of proliferate in those abandoned greenhouses, and they start populations in Texas, and they're all of a very, they're a particular physical quality, and they become their own species. And, it's a replaying of what's happened on Earth with plants, for millions of years in a weird way. We're just involved now, which is like, it's weird, but also not that weird,
within the context of all this and within the reality that, I don't know, I mean, not to be pessimistic, but we might be a little bit past the point of no return, how can one be a responsible collector?
That's a good question. I mean, first you have to know what you're buying, and you do have to sort of research the plant a bit to be able to tell plants that are, extracted from habitat and plants that are grown in cultivation. I think that asking whoever you're buying plants from if the plant was grown from seed, obviously you're relying a little bit on their honesty, but asking where the plant came from, if the plant was grown from seed, are ways to start. People collect plants legally all the time. People are exporting plants by the thousands, every week that are collected in quotes legally. But the problem is in where these plants grow, there's such nominal oversight, and there isn't the research body there to really study the plants and see which could be extracted from habitat and which populations are stable. And they're basically paying an official a sort of fee who doesn't have the information necessary to really make the call. And they let these plants be taken out of the country or taken out of these habitats without, the proper research. And so, yeah, they're legal, but they're in a way just as bad as a poached plant. So I think that asking if they were grown from seed is sort of your best bet. Obviously, there's problems with seed extraction too, but they're much less than, actually taking physical plants out of the environment.
If you're interested in collecting plants, or you're already a plant collector, or if you want to get more involved in that, I think there's a lot of really good resources out there. And I highly recommend engaging with botanical gardens, who often themselves have grappled with a history of problematic collection from their beginning, now figure out how to go forward into conservation and education. And I think there are also a lot of really interesting collections that you can visit without having to own. Yeah,
that's I like that thought, Nina, is that maybe the trick is to shift how we perceive ownership. And do we need to own?
Oh, that's easy for us to say with our
greenhouse.
And me with my 5 bajillion orchids, so I get it. But I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's an open question. I think we can.
I think there's a way to do it, responsibly.
Yeah.
And I think that if you're educated, like Nina's proposing, and then you can sort of curb some of the desires, and maybe you're just growing from seed, and you learn to have some patience. I mean, I think that's the other problem is people. And I'm not coming down on people because I don't have any, but patience, for, not having the thing in its fully formed, sense at the moment, and that you could maybe wait years and appreciate the years for this thing to grow and to sort of become what you, desired at the first second.
Yeah.
Yeah. I suck at that.
Yeah, us too.
Very true.
When you're raised on impatience, it's hard to re-engage that, Yeah.
And if you want something, you buy it.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you forget about it often.
It does.
No, it's crazy. I look around the greenhouse sometimes and I'm like, I was so obsessed with finding that plant, so deeply obsessed. And now it's just it's not that I neglect it, but it's just another plant in the greenhouse. Yeah. All the months that I would get up at 1 a.m. and recheck eBay to see if grower had responded or whatever, and on to the next one.
Well, maybe we got to the core of the human desire to seek and obtain is just it's the hunt.
It's the hunt. And when you can't hunt animals, or you don't hunt animals anymore, then you're hunting plants on eBay.
Or rare perfume materials.
Exactly.
That was Carlos Morera and Nina Mross from Cactus Store in Los Angeles. The 2 plants they spoke about were Copia poa, a genus endemic to the Chilean Atacama Desert, and the cycad family of plants endemic to southern Africa. I really enjoyed talking to Carlos and Nina and hearing about how the stories humans weave around plants impact their perceived value and the lengths that people will go to get the thing that they think they need. For another perspective on the value of plants, and one that I think that Carlos and Nina can definitely relate to, I reached out to Matthew Teutimez, who I met when we worked together exploring the historic sense of a plot of land in downtown LA. I asked Matthew to introduce himself at the start of our chat, so I will let him speak for himself. Here is Matthew.
My name is Matthew Teutimez. I'm the son of John Teutimez, elder in the Kizh Gabrieleno tribe, and nephew to Chief Ernie Salas Teutimez. My uncle has passed away this year, and so our generation is now bringing forth his legacy in the environmental stewardship that our tribe has done since time immemorial. My purpose in the tribe is I'm the biologist for the tribe. I was one of the fortunate cousins to be able to go to school and get a master's degree in biology from Long Beach State. And I also got my undergraduate from Long Beach State as well. So I'm just a local kid trying to do my best to continue my uncle's stewardship and to bring forth the tribal ecological knowledge that our family still contains within our oral history and, within our activities that we do.
Well, so your relationship to the land obviously is long-term, deep, and it matters. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about sort of to describe what that relationship is for the Kizh. Is it the Kizh tribe or is it the Kizh Gabrieleno tribe?
So we retain the Gabrieleno name because that's the name in history. Okay. That's how we're described from the state of California as the Aboriginal tribe of the LA Basin. It's known as the Gabrielenos. And so we call ourselves Kizh Gabrieleno. Our belief and what my uncle has taught us is that the plants, the animals, all the landscape features, the resources that come up from the ground, the oil, the water, everything is a gift from our creator. When you're given a gift and you have something of value, you take care of it. And that's our purpose as caretakers of this land, is that we were given all these gifts and a numerous amount of gifts, because we not only had gifts from the land, we had gifts from the ocean too, because we were seafaring folks. And so all these gifts collective is what we used to share with our surrounding brothers and sisters in the other lands. And then in so doing, they would share the gifts that they were given with us. I mean, one simple example is obsidian. Obsidian today is found readily within a lot of the projects that we work on that we monitor for tribal culture resources. Obsidian is one of the, one factors that everyone recognizes because that's what you make arrowheads out of. But you also made a bunch of tools out of it. It was a very useful component, but it's volcanic glass. We don't have volcanoes in the LA Basin. So the closest place you can get obsidian is, up north in Blythe, out in the desert. You can get it, out down south towards the Salton Sea area, towards that area, or, up in Mammoth, in the Sierra Nevada range. But nothing is within our territory. So what that means is that the obsidian that's being found today in 2021 has been imported to this land through that exchange of these gifts. And that reality of looking at these resources as not just a resource for our use, for, our human benefits, but looking at them as a resource from our creator. And we want to make sure that that resource is taken good care of while we're here on this earth. We're going to join our creator later on. And we want to make sure that we were good stewards, good caretakers of his gifts for us.
So we've met before. I've heard some of your thoughts before, but I remember you talking about there was a tree in downtown, or near what is now downtown LA, that was a very important tree, and it was a sort of center for trade. Would you tell us a little bit about that?
It's called El Aliso, or the ancient sycamore, and it was known as like the well, let me just give you a background of why that tree was chosen. We have 3 or 4 old growth trees. We have oak, we have sycamore. Even some of our cottonwoods can be hundreds of years old. But oak and sycamore, they live for hundreds and hundreds of years. And their growth type makes them different. Where oaks, when they grow together, they kind of create a canopy, a level canopy. If you look at them on the horizon, you just see kind of the same level of canopy. Whereas sycamores, they grow up like beacons, like towers. And when you look on them on the landscape, you can see them from a far distance away. And because our landscape was mainly made up of low-growing scrub, we didn't have huge forests, and we had our riparian corridors that had large trees, but mainly in our landscape was low-growing scrub. And so because of that, I guess, optical kind of component to the sycamores were readily used, not just there, in other areas within our tribal territory, ancestral territory, where they were used for burial sites and important burial sites. And this particular tree, the El Aliso in Los Angeles, was used for a very important burial site. So important that leaders from as far as Yuma, Arizona, and potentially even farther would come and meet under that tree. And then they would be praying, they'd be doing ceremony. And a lot of the settlers who were living here, and they looked at the Indians from all over coming to that tree, they're like, whoa, these crazy pagans, they're praying to a tree. The prayers were going on, yes, but it wasn't to the tree. It was an acknowledgement of the tree, but an acknowledgement of those that were buried under the tree. It was high-powered leaders and spiritual leaders that were buried there. And the thought is that those leaders contained powers that were given to them from our Creator. And they were asking, hey, can you give me some of that power while I'm here on this earth? You that are in this earth that I'm standing on right now, that my feet are connected to that DNA that's within that soil, that's connected to your body, your remains that are in this earth. That was kind of, the concept of the meetings, was to ask for this help and this guidance, for the future years. And so it was thought of as so important that other leaders from other tribes would make that journey to that tree to have that sort of connection with the leaders of our land. We were known as a very giving tribe, as a very giving community, and that giving also related in the spiritual world as well. And so that component was a shared component, which is why the religion of Tamet, of the sunstone, was also shared amongst many of the surrounding nations as well. And that's the story of Chinik, the lawgiver. All of these components derive from our ancient lineage. And so that's another importance of why this landscape. So it's not just, certain plants or certain animals. It's the entire landscape that has the value, to our tribal nation, to all the folks who derive from the same DNA that's within that soil that's there in the LA basin. If folks want to learn a little bit more about it, there's a plaque that my uncle put there on Commercial Street, and it's right by the 101 freeway. And you can see a plaque where the sycamore actually existed, and it tells a little bit more history there of the purpose of that tree and how important that location, not the tree, it's the location that was important, because of all the humans that are underneath there. And we actually, unfortunately, had to be part of a reburial of some humans that were dug up, even though we told the agency prior to that, because that tree's there, you're going to have burials there. They're like, oh, yeah, whatever, yada, yada. This is just hearsay. Our oral history has always been considered hearsay. And we have story after story of how we've told the agencies prior to them digging into the land that they're going to find these ancient relics and these burial sites, that they're just like, how did you guys know? And it's because of our oral history. Even the Native American Heritage Commission, their lawyer had made a special point of recognizing our oral history that occurred in Sabril in front of the mission. It was because of a massacre story that our families knew of that occurred. And we knew that the folks that were massacred were actually buried in a huge pit just right outside of one of the windows from the mission. And we had all this in our own story, but because archaeologists didn't know about it, because, they even had the Tongva tribe involved with that, they didn't know about it. But when we came up, and my uncle and my cousin actually came up to all the officials and said, hey, do you guys know if you dig over there, you're going to be digging up, human burials? And they're like, no, we already have representatives, from the indigenous people, which were the Tongva people. And, what you guys are saying, you're just trying to stop our project. Here, you're getting escorted off. They actually called the police to escort my uncle and my cousin off the site. And then the next week, as they're digging, they end up uncovering 150, 200 human remains. And then, unfortunately, the state had identified the Tongva people as the indigenous people. So they allowed them to continue to do data recovery, and they uncovered more and more and more people. And I wish I could get you in contact with some of the archaeologists that had to work on that site. They were actually getting sick from being down in those burial areas. And there is just bad juju all around that whole site.
I bet.
And it's because no one recognizes who the true ancestral people and what the true oral history trying to be brought forth to protect these tribal resources, especially our human burial locations.
Good Lord. It's messed up. It's messed up.
And still is, unfortunately.
I'm sorry to hear that. I guess that's where the Tongva issue becomes a real issue, because then you don't have agency over your own history. I mean, I start to see the ramifications of what you're talking about.
Yes.
So Matt, shifting gears a little bit, and I'm sorry because this warrants time and attention, but I know that you have a very specific relationship to smell, and I know this because we've worked together on a project in the past, and you told me all about it. But I was wondering if you could tell our radio audience a little bit about how you relate to the sense of smell and your work with plants.
I mean, that component, it's actually quite interesting. I never really realized how much smell played a part in our daily activities and just our understanding of the environment until I guess spending more time with my uncle and bringing him plants. He never really looked at the plant. For me, going to school and learning the science component of how to identify plants, we look at the structures, we look at, the flowering parts, how long the anther is. So we look at all the phenotypic components, of the plant to try and discern what it is. So it's all visual. Well, my uncle, every time I would bring him a plant, he would then just break it up a little bit and smell it. And then, this is a medicine plant, and then he'd go into an explanation about that plant. It made sense to me because many of our plants we are so lucky here in Los Angeles and pretty much in a lot of the coastal sage scrub of California, which goes from San Francisco all the way down through, into Mexico, into Ensenada. All that habitat type, I believe, is just the most fragrant habitat in all the world. And many of our plants, and that's why we had to be so, in science, we had to be so minute with our, or so exact, I should say, with our measurements, because you'll have a plant that looks exactly like another plant. And if you don't have the correct parts that are the different parts, then you'll think it's the same plant. But their fragrances, they are not the same. They are always different. And that's one of the main components with our plants, is that they all have unique fragrances and unique smells. So for identification purposes, it's actually a better methodology to use fragrance for your identification of the plants. And that's just standard modality for me. That's just my standard practice, is I smell the plant first and I try and remember that fragrance. And then that's how I learn the plant, if it's a new plant to me. And it's not so much its look, because all throughout the year, our plants look different. They have vegetative form during part. They have, their flowering form, then they have their fruiting form. So they have all these different forms. Then they have, the dying off form where they're withering away, but their smell will always be the same throughout the year. So you can have a dead piece of sage and it will still have a fragrance associated with it that you can say, oh, wow, this is, this plant. So that reality for us has helped me understand that the sense of smell is a very important sense that I feel we were just genetically in tune to because of so much fragrance that occurs on our landscape. So that reality is what has made it so interesting to me to speak with you all about just how the olfactory component was an important component for life here living on this landscape.
That was Matthew, or Matt Teutimez, of the Gabrieleno tribe. You didn't know this because we were on the radio, but I spoke to Matt while he was in Germany supporting his nephew, who was one of 23 American kids invited to participate in an elite soccer club. So go, Matt's nephew, go. We're all rooting for you. Matt and I spoke quite a bit more, but because of time constraints, we had to cut some of our conversation out. So please visit Perfume on the Radio for an outtake, where Matt talks about conservation and some fascinating experiences with the smell of ants. And that, my friends, was our show, episode 16 of Perfume on the Radio, which we called I'll Find You, My Precious. In this episode, we searched for, and I think we found, some fascinating insights into how humans relate to our very human impulse to seek out rare and beautiful aromatics, plants, landscapes, however we choose to define our particular treasure. As always, I want to take an extra moment to thank Darian Zahedi, Maxwell Williams, and Emmett James for our Perfume on the Radio audio identities, and always to Lookout FM for hosting this admittedly rather niche and totally unreliable radio show. Perfume on the Radio is produced by the Institute for Art and Olfaction, based in Los Angeles, California. This episode, like all others, will be archived on perfumeontheradio.com, and you can also download it on a podcast provider of your choice and enjoy it in a location of your choice. Just don't forget to look around for shiny things and tiny treasures. I'm Saskia Wilson-Brown, founder of the Institute for Art and Olfaction, and your happy hostess for this episode. It's been my pleasure to host today's show, and we'll be back in a few weeks, maybe a month and a half. Until then, friends, keep it kind, keep it real, and keep it smelly.
Smells good, Mom.
Make any space the space. Whiffers.
Just can't shake that nostalgia? Give us a call at 1-800 Someone's Got Your Nose.
Won't you get a whiff of that?
Do you suffer from scent aesthesia? This is Perfume on Radio.